You're listening to Season 2 of Beyond Insights, your go-to podcast for all things accounting, business, and technology. Unsure how to improve your leadership skills, or whether you're suited to being a leader to begin with? Looking for ways to build a stronger team or take better risks? Then stay tuned.
From cybersecurity, blockchain, and AI innovations to sustainability, employee retention, and work-life balance, we've got you covered.
We speak to knowledgeable and insightful guests from varied backgrounds, industries, and locations from all around the globe.
From this multiplicity of thought, we strive to find solutions to our most urgent business problems.
Whether you're a small business owner, an accountant, entrepreneur, or even a young professional looking to progress, this podcast is for you.
Thank you for tuning in. Let's dive right in and go beyond insights.
Today we're chatting about why a robust environmental, social, and governance framework makes financial sense. And I have the privilege of speaking to the Chief Operating Officer of Digby Environmental, Pieter Scholtz. With a background in metallurgical engineering, Pieter was formerly the Director ESG at Sutari and the ESG Partner for Africa at KPMG, and brings a wealth of knowledge on this topic to this discussion. Pieter, it's lovely to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. Hello everyone. As we mentioned earlier, we're in the studio with Pieter Scholtz. Pieter, welcome. It's a privilege to have you here. We're very excited about this topic. I am, for one. So to start with, you studied metallurgical engineering. How did you end up in the world of ESG, or how did it find you?
Thanks, Lorica. Thank you for having me. ESG found me a little bit. Studying metallurgical engineering, I started my career on the coal mines in Middelburg.
Lovely.
As you would expect from a good metallurgical engineer. And then what happened one day is I was standing and looking at what the team was doing. Now, when you process coal, it's gravity separation.
Yes.
Where the rocks sink, the coal floats, long story. But what happens then at the end is the water with a very fine material goes into a processing piece of equipment that we call a thickener.
Okay.
Where the very fine solid material settles out, and those get pumped to tailings dams.
Okay.
What happened that specific day is there was something wrong with the system. And when a thickener stands, the entire mine stands.
Makes sense. Can't process the garbage out.
Yeah, so everything stands. And I watched the general manager, which sort of is the king on the mine, come, and he basically gave the instruction to say, I don't care what you do, get it back up and running. And I watched them drain the entire thickener into the Blesbokspruit, which is a tributary of the Oosthuizen River, which ultimately flows through Mpumalanga, Limpopo, into Kruger, into Mozambique. And months later, I was walking next to the Oosthuizen River on a walking trail in Kruger, and we saw all of these dead crocodiles. Now, you might be too young to remember that, I'm not sure, but there was a big environmental catastrophe in Kruger with the crocodiles, the fat in their tails hardening due to poisons in the water. And as I was watching that, I thought, is this perhaps from the mine that I was watching? And in that moment, I knew that I wanted to be part of the solution.
Yes. Okay.
It wasn't long after that where I got the opportunity to design South Africa's first zero effluent coal processing facility, which means no slurry goes anywhere. So no tailings dams that can break or pollute the environment. So I grabbed that, absolutely loved it. And then I was in the consulting business. So I designed a couple of other minerals beneficiation plants. And then one day my manager came to me and said to me, do you know anything about mine closure? Well, I will.
We'll learn today.
We'll learn. So the next day we went to a client, we had discussions, and we started helping them with their mine closure strategy. And that was where I, for the first time, really got exposed to triple bottom line sustainability. Right? So environmental sustainability, social sustainability, and financial sustainability. And I was fascinated by it. So for more than a decade now, that's the space where I've played. trying to help our clients to keep their businesses financially viable whilst at the same time maximizing environmental and social sustainability. And that's how I got into the ESG sustainability space.
Oh, that's very interesting. I'm so glad I've never had a walk in the Kruger where I knew, like, this is my boss's fault, right? All these animals
Well, I
dying.
suspected it.
I know. But still, I think we all have experiences like that in our job that makes us realize we can't do what we're currently doing. We need to make a bit of a change.
We have to be better.
Yes, I will tell you about how I move jobs. So you mentioned the environmental and social and financial sustainability. Is there anything else in the ESG space that also happens in that scope? What else do you guys look after?
So ESG comes from E for environmental, S for social, G for governance.
That's all types of governance?
That is all types of governance that ensures that you do your business in the right manner. Now, if you listen to Professor Mervyn King, one of the most incredible people you can ever hope to meet, he will tell you if you get the governance right, the environmental and the social part in any case takes care of themselves, right? But that's where ESG comes from. Now, ESG, I think a lot of people have this misnomer and they think about it very compliance orientated.
Yes.
So I think of ESG more from a sustainability perspective. So when we talk about ESG, yes, environmental, yes, social, but on the governance side, is what I'm doing ethical? Do I have all the right oversight in place? And when I do those components, then that requires me to have certain committees, certain policies, certain ways of working with my suppliers, with my labor force. How do I deal with the waste coming from my business? So this is how we would typically then think about those things. For me, ESG and sustainability is one and the same thing.
I actually agree with that. I think from an auditing perspective or a financial perspective, we obviously also deal with Professor King quite a lot, and more from an auditing background and perspective. But I think what happens is that it can become a checklist exercise really quickly. They have this list of 100 things that we need to get done, and if that's fine, we're fine. But that's actually not what we're trying to do, right? We're not being principle-based then. We're making it a rule, which is the exact opposite of our goal, right? That won't enforce sustainability. It won't help. It's just ticking things off a list.
And you see, the other problem with having ESG or sustainability as a tick box exercise is then you start thinking about it as a cost.
Yes,
right? Which means that it's becoming a burden on your business.
Yes. So expensive to save the earth.
And the reality is, if you do this right, it actually has financial benefits for your business because there's opportunities, but much more importantly is you identify a lot more risks that you have to mitigate to actually ensure that your business remains viable and sustainable.
That makes sense. Okay, so we are going to look at risks. We're going to look at opportunities. Are there anything else that we need to consider in this space?
So from an ESG or sustainability perspective, if you know all your risks and you have the right mechanisms in place to identify the opportunities that could make your business financially better, more sustainable in the long run, not just from an environmental and social perspective, from a financial perspective, then you're doing ESG right.
Okay, that's good. So let's start with opportunities then. We're trying to be financially sustainable. We're obviously also trying to save the earth. That is something that's very important to me. I grew up in a household where lights were switched off, right, if you're not in the room. And that was always from a environmental perspective. It was never from a cost-saving exercise perspective. My mother, I also grew up close to coal mines, and I have this picture, and she can't remember this day, but I was reading in bed in the morning. I had woken up before the sun had risen, and I switched on my lights, and I was reading, and she came into my room when the sun was already up, and she was like, Larika, do you know that there's someone at Duba shoveling coal into a fire to make this light for you. And I've never been able to get it out of my head, right? So I think if you grow up in that sort of environment, it's something that's very close to your heart. But being an accountant, finance is always really important. And we always want to save money. We always want to make money if we can. But what opportunities do we have in this space? Like, why? You said there are many to unlock. What are they?
So from a financial perspective, the opportunities are obviously very bespoke to the industry that you're in.
That makes sense.
Right? But what we've seen is the companies that get this right the best do it across multiple different layers.
Okay.
So they grow their top line.
Okay.
And the way this works is research shows us that sustainability-linked products generally have almost a 5.6 times bigger demand growth than non-sustainability linked products.
Wow.
Right? So for a lot of us, when we walk into a shop and there's two products next to one another, the one is a green product, the other one isn't. If it's the same cost, and even if it's maybe a little bit more, we'll take the one that is more sustainable.
Okay.
Right? So that is a big way that companies are starting to think about this. If you have a supply chain, or rather a value chain going into the European Union, you can get significant upside for products that meet the necessary sustainability requirements. So companies that think about this in that way can grow the top line.
Okay.
Right? But even if you can't grow the top line, there's ways in which you can grow the bottom line.
Okay.
So by implementing more sustainable measures of doing business, so transforming your the power that you use from coal-based power or gas-based power, which is better, to true renewable energy, in the long run has a viable business case. And if it doesn't, then you've probably done your project wrong.
That's good to know. I'm going to remember that for future. Project is wrong if it's not working.
There's very few of these projects where you transform your energy sources from fossil-based fuels to renewable energy that doesn't have a positive MPV, doesn't make financial sense, and doesn't specifically reduce your operating expenditure in the long run.
Okay. How long is this long run?
So the best I've seen is 12 months. I'm talking about large companies,
yes.
right? Others is 5 to 10 years.
That's not even that long.
No.
It's actually quite quick.
So, and we can talk about this for a very long time. The fascinating thing is there's very simple ways in which you can actually have all of this financed in a way that it doesn't come off your balance sheet.
Off balance sheet financing, love to hear it.
Right, but it's just how you think about this and the mentality you have and how you try and identify these different opportunities. The other way in which to improve your bottom line without necessarily improving the top line is cost of capital.
Okay.
Right, there's many different mechanisms out there and products out there where sustainability-linked projects or companies can get debt or equity or other forms of finance at a lower cost of capital than non-sustainability-linked products, projects, or companies.
Okay.
So now imagine if you can grow your top line because your products have been marketed well from a sustainability perspective. You reduce your operating expenditure because you've implemented the right sustainability measures, and your cost of capital is lower. Now you have whammy on whammy on whammy.
You're hitting your equity 3 times.
Correct.
In a good way.
In a good way. But there's 2 additional things that a lot of people miss. The one is, McKinsey did some fantastic research that shows that companies that get their regulatory strategies wrong, so anticipating what regulations are coming, are putting at least 30% of their profits at risk. Right?
That's so much. That's off the bottom line.
That's of the bottom line.
30% of your bottom line is insecure.
Right. Now, we know currently things are halting a little bit with Donald Trump in the USA and some of the right-wing pushes in the EU, but ultimately things will correct back again. So regulations are coming. So it's important to at least understand what might be coming. How can I make sure that it doesn't come as a surprise to me at that stage? And then in my mind, the most important thing, especially for companies that's dependent on a qualified workforce, is the impact that productivity of workers has on your business.
Okay.
Right, so research shows that people that find a linkage between their internal purpose and the company's purpose stays at least 2.8 times or about 3 times longer at a company than if that isn't the case. Right now, the scholars of business management will tell you that we are spending inordinate amounts of money and time in managing attrition in businesses.
Yes.
Now, if you can reduce that attrition because people are finding a closer purpose link between your company and themselves, financially, that is a huge implication. And how do you do that? So 40% of millennials, this is about 80% for Gen Zs, right? The new group of people coming into the workforce in mass are looking at a company's sustainability performance to determine, are they going to work there or not? Right?
Okay.
Will they stay there or not? So from a productivity perspective, if you can make sure that your business is sustainable, does the right things, you're not only attracting the right talent, you're keeping them longer. You are protecting your profits at risk. You are growing your bottom line. You are growing your top line. Everything works for you. But that requires you to stop thinking about ESG as a tick box exercise and think about it of how do I integrate this in my overall strategy and execute it very deliberately and strategically.
That makes sense. I think, well, being a millennial, being a bit younger, yes, we coal mine shoveling person at Duva aside, you think about these things, but I didn't think it would be as many of us thinking about it and staying 3 times longer just because you can link value. And in a generation where the other scholars say that everyone wants to jump, yes.
Yes.
That's right, all the time. If you can keep them for 3 years instead of for 1, you're already winning because you don't invest the money in searching for a new person. You don't have to incur that upskill cost every single time.
Yes.
You can reduce your expenses by quite a bit, especially if you're a large company who hires all the time, right? Okay.
Exactly.
So now you mentioned that you have to move away from the tick list checkbox exercise, but what will happen if you don't?
So there's a couple of things that will happen, right? If ESG or sustainability for you is a tick box thing, firstly, it is almost invariably going to be a cost for you instead of an financial
perhaps?
upside asset. So like we've just discussed, right? But there's a couple of other things. If sustainability isn't intricately linked into the strategy of your business, then you have a very good chance of missing key risks linked to environmental disruptors and social disruptors. So to give you an example, right? If you have a manufacturing facility that's in a low-lying area and you do not already have plans of how you will make sure that if there's one of these flood events, that your entire premises are protected, it's unlikely that your business will be sustainable in the long run because more and more insurers will move away from insuring businesses against big climate events like flooding, right? Historically, we had 1 in 100 years flood meant it was once in 100 years. Now we have 1 in 100 year floods almost every year, every couple of years. So either your insurance is going to become ridiculously expensive or you will not be insured.
Both are bad.
Both are bad. So if ESG is just a tick box for you, then you probably don't have the plans in place to say, how will I protect my business against flooding? Some of the businesses in KwaZulu-Natal, when they had the riots, actually were protected by their communities, because the communities perceived the businesses as being to their benefit.
Okay.
Right? Now, if you get ESG just as a tick box exercise, then it is unlikely that your host community will think of your business as a benefit to them. So a lot of companies, climate change is going to disrupt the social fabric of Africa very specifically, right? Do you have all the right mechanisms in place? Do you have the right mitigation measures in place to de-risk social instability from disrupting your business? It's just tick boxes. If you haven't thought about all of these things in great detail, it's not integrated in how you do business. For instance, how you spend your corporate social investment money, then all you're going to do is have papers at the end with ticks on them instead of having actually de-risked your business.
I get that. You mentioned the social instability. Now, I didn't know about the riots in KZN and how they protected it. It makes sense, right? You protect what's important to you. And if the company doesn't see you as important, you won't see them as important.
Yeah.
That's why you don't buy their product. It's why you don't protect them during a situation where they should be protected. What other risks are there, and how can we mitigate them, if we even can? Because I'm thinking we can. That's why we're here, right?
So risks is going to be very bespoke to every specific company or industry.
Just like the opportunity, right?
Yeah.
Bespoke.
So, but the easy way to go about this, and in the audit industry, coming from that industry, you would know about materiality.
Yes.
Right, so from an ESG perspective, we talk about the double materiality assessment, where you think about what is material to your business in two layers. The one is, what are the external risks from an environmental, social, and governance perspective that could affect my business or have a real impact on my business? So, for instance, if you are not a company that has a fishing fleet in the Western Cape coastal waters, then, you know, why would you have a risk that you're trying to manage around overfishing in those waters, right? So, what is material to your business?
Okay.
But the second layer to that is, what are the impacts that my business have on society and on the environment? And with those two layers of materiality, you then identify what are all the considerations that you need to manage and monitor, and ultimately the regulations will have to report on. And that helps you to identify all of those risks, right? If you are an automotive manufacturer, you already know now that you have a potential risk around artisans available to do your work. And with where the automotive sector is going, you're going to need AI whiz kits, because the automotive sector is moving from cars to data, right? So how do I spend my corporate social investment money that I have to spend from a BEE perspective to make sure that I have a pipeline of artisans and technology whizzes that comes from my host communities? Now I'm starting to get multiple outputs for singular financial input, and I'm de-risking a number of different risks for my business. So every industry would be different, but if you follow that process, identifying your material risks, and you put in the plans and the mitigation actions, you get maybe a little bit of your clever people in a room, see what innovative links you can make. Then not only financially does this become a really great tool for you, but you prevent the risks very bespoke to your company or your industry from materializing.
And that's what we want to do, right? It sounds almost like a not putting all of your eggs in one basket approach.
Yes.
If you identify them all separately and you manage them all separately, you can get the total risk or the total materiality, right, to a more manageable place. Because in the event that one of them do, hopefully not, but if one of them materializes, at least it's only one. And you've mitigated that one specifically, and it won't lead to a chain of events and knock-on effect, because I'm sure in most industries you would see that. You were speaking about the linkage between the risks. If you don't manage one properly, it'll have a domino effect, and the next one will start materializing.
Yep.
Do you guys see this happening in practice as well, I'm assuming?
Absolutely. So if you think about, with climate change, we know that the poorest people will be affected negatively, disproportionately, which means Africa.
Yes.
Right? We know in southern Africa that the east of the continent will have a lot more of these crazy weather events, flooding every once in a while. And then we know that the west will become drier.
Okay.
Right? Now, let's say you're a mine in the eastern parts of southern Africa with floods causing disruption to your host communities. If you don't anticipate the risks that will cause from a social instability perspective, and the way you manage your operation and the expenditure that you have towards community development and community de-risking, then it is very likely that your operations at some point will be closed. But something that really would have been quite easy to actually try and manage.
That makes sense. And it's a good lesson for us all to learn, right? But we've spoken a lot about companies now, which is what we're talking about, financial sense. But I have a massive problem with people that think it's not their own personal responsibility as well, right? You should be switching off the lights. They're like, it's big corporate, it's the mines, we should. And that's not incorrect. It is the mines and it is big corporate. But what can we do? What can I tell people who think that sustainability is not their own personal problem?
So I've found that there's only two types of people that aren't receptive to that message. And those are narcissists and psychopaths.
Oh, okay.
Right? Everybody else, when they at least understand that we are using the resources on Earth faster than what they can be replenished at this exact moment, they would realize that not only for us, but for the generations to come, we have no choice but to do everything we can to not be part of a problem that started decades ago. But for a narcissist and a psychopath, you're not going to get through. So
we can give up on them, but the rest understand, teach. Because I think that is a problem, right? We don't understand what is happening and we don't understand how we should be managing it. But if we educate ourselves and the people around us, we can get to a place where everyone recycles and switches off the lights, right?
Absolutely.
I love that. And to get to our the resident questions that we always ask, the rapid fire ones.
Yeah.
What is the best book you've read in the recent past?
Pain Forms the Character, which is a fantastic book was written about the start of research and the immense input that South Africans gave to changing Marion Island and protecting the island and its ecosystems. It's a wonderful read written by Nico and Oosthuizen.
Oh, I'll go. I've made my notes now. I'm going to go look for that. And are there any podcasts that you listen to regularly that we should give a listen to?
So there's quite a lot at this stage when I'm driving long distances. I love to listen to There's No Such Thing as a Fish.
Okay.
It is a silly podcast with interesting facts and some wacky things going on, but it's just a nice listen. Some interesting factoids along the way.
Okay. And what is the most valuable lesson you've learned in your career?
you can never stop learning.
That's a good lesson.
No more learning is death.
That makes sense. And to end this with, and I've had such a lovely time speaking with you about this topic specifically, but what is the key takeaway that listeners should have?
Sustainability done right unlocks real value, not only for ourselves and for our companies, but very specifically also for future generations.
That's perfect. One-liner we have the LinkedIn tag. Pieter, thank you so much for your time. It was a real privilege having you here. I really enjoyed it, and we hope to see you here soon.
Thanks for having me, Lorica. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to the Beyond Insights podcast. Please like and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to right now. And please share with any of your colleagues or friends or family members that you think might benefit from listening to this podcast. That's all from us. Until next time, see you then.